Good morning, Peter Racy here, ANZAC Day Precinct YouTube channel. It is the 27th of September 2021 and we are doing another letter to Hexham. And today's topic is extremely important because it's about the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Cross of Sacrifice and the Stone of Remembrance at the Toowong Cemetery, which will be occurring on the 25th of April 2024. And I've got numerous letters to the editor that are vitally important to that narrative, and we're going to read them into the public record. So the first item I want to read into the public record is actually an editorial by the Brisbane Courier on the 25th of April 1924, and it says, "The most massive stone ever hewn from a Queensland quarry is being dedicated today to the memory of those who fell or died of wounds or sickness as our soldiers in the Great War. There is an ancestral touch about this memorial, a reminiscence of those hoary monoliths that are the sole mark on English soil of heroes whose dust, whose names and whose deeds had otherwise passed into absolute obscurity." It then goes on to say later, "It is a replica of those great stones which stand near the entrances of all the great war cemeteries, and so links our God's acre of 350 soldier graves with those in the fields of France, the gullies of Gallipoli and the jungle of New Guinea, and the holy fields of Palestine and the mother earth of Britain. Like those also, this stone bears no names upon it, neither of those who erected it, nor of those for whom it is meant to be an everlasting resemblance." Now, it's incredibly important to note that what triggered my interest in all of this was a posting by Peter Collins that this memorial is a national memorial, unveiled by the Governor-General, attended to by British naval personnel and Australian Defence personnel, being the very first memorial of this type unveiled within a cemetery in Australia. And those of you who have followed the thread of this YouTube channel know that from time to time I have referred to Walter Harding, a one-time local councillor for the Toowong Shire and a person who is very passionate to see ANZAC Park and its role and narrative in the ANZAC legend and the ANZAC Day legend, more than likely, multiplied and increased. And an interesting fact I have sort of realised is that both Canon Garland and Walter Harding passed away in 1939. Walter Harding on the 21st of May 1939 and Canon Garland later that year. And what makes it significant is that Walter Harding was vociferous in his lobbying to see the ANZAC Square proposal actually built at ANZAC Park at Toowong. But this memorial, the one that we're currently looking at, actually launched and put on a very sound trajectory the ANZAC Square that eventuated in the city, because this demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that the people of Queensland would raise to the challenge and fundraise for an Anzac Day memorial site of great significance. And I think it's important at this point that I jump ahead a little bit in our narrative to talk about a letter to the editor that was not signed under the name of Walter Harding, but bore all the hallmarks of the authorship of Walter Harding. And that letter was published on the 16th of July 1927. It was a letter to the editor of the Brisbane Courier. And in part it says, "Thousands of trees were planted in the park, nearly all of them by Walter Charles Harding, each tree for a soldier or sailor, and having a plate attached to give the name and particulars, regiment, and many of those trees have done well. But through the strange apathy of the late Toowong Council, ANZAC Park was shamefully neglected, and much of the valuable work done by private individuals in connection with the planting of the trees has been lost irretrievably. Since the creation of the Greater Brisbane Council, the park has remained neglected. It would do everyone good next Sunday afternoon to take a Toowong tram and go out to the cemetery and walk through ANZAC Park to the top of One Tree Hill." And it goes on to say, in its argument against the £25,000 that had been raised for ANZAC Square to be actually relocated and expended at ANZAC Park. ANZAC Park is the place for the ANZAC Memorial, and any money furbished by the public, either by subscription or government grant, should be laid out to the best advantage on the site which has so long ago been dedicated for that purpose. Signed, Anonymous. And that just shows you the passion that was stirred up at the time about ANZAC Square and the incredibly positive response of the public to the fundraising call led by Canon Garland. So as we move to conclude this letter to Hexham about this incredibly important event in the life of Canon David John Garland, the architect of ANZAC Day, I was surprised to discover that 12 months after that impassioned editorial in the Brisbane Courier, that in the Telegraph, a sister publication, I think, but I could be wrong, it actually talks about that one of the great election issues in relation to that very first amalgamated Brisbane City Council election was ANZAC Square. And I read from an editorial on the 9th of January 1925. "The people of Brisbane are indebted to Mr. A. Watson, Mayor of Toowong and a candidate for a seat on the Greater Brisbane Council, for the live interest that he is taking in the question of ANZAC Square, and we are sure that his activity will hasten a solution of the present difficulties. We do not, however, consider that the proposal he puts forward in today's issue of the Telegraph should be adopted. The whole area should be obtained by all means, and to that extent we are in entire agreement with Mr. Watson and his supporters, that nothing less than the full square should be regarded as adequate or satisfactory." It then goes on further in the editorial. "If a partial scheme is adopted through stress of circumstances, those circumstances including the lukewarmness or indifference of the federal and state governments, ANZAC Square will not really be a square, though it may be something worthwhile, but it will be a permanent monument to the niggleness of the highest powers in the land in the year of grace 1925, a lasting proof of the unpleasant fact that governments concerned would not give the help that they could have given. This, we think, is an attitude that might well be taken by the public and the candidates for election to the Greater Brisbane Council, that all possible arguments should be brought forward and the pressure really brought to bear on the federal and state governments to induce those to forgo their holdings on the area so that ANZAC Square may be as the soldiers and the people desire. And you can just hear Canon Garland in the background cheering because he's had such a great win here, had such a great win in 1924 in bringing this wonderful national memorial into being. And the power of politics, no longer than 12 months later, is threatening to derail the vision of a truly monumental ANZAC Square. And with that, we'll say good morning.